Hello and welcome to the channel and welcome to another Heretic Dave Top Tips video. In this episode I'm going to talk about deployment and how to get the best out of your deployment, because time and time again it's been said, and I've seen it, people can lose games on deployment. Doesn't matter who's going first, if you deploy badly you can lose a game just by where you put your models at the start of the game. So it's very important that you deploy things in good positions. If you deploy most of your army out in the open and you lose that first turn roll off and the opponent's got lots of guns, you will get shot off the board and it's a complete waste of time. Likewise, if you're a very too cautious with your deployment, it can have a negative impact if you go first, because you'll be slower than you would have been if you were a little bit more aggressive, I guess. So it's finding the right balance, and it's also about putting the right types of units in the right place to get a good first turn, whether you go first or not. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So I've set up a board here. This is for a game I actually played earlier today, although it was probably on a battle report a week or two ago. And this is using the Dawn of War deployment. Nice and simple one. Let's talk about this. The tips I'll be giving for this deployment can be applied to any type of deployment, whether it be Dawn of War, Hammer of Anvil, the quarter one, the diagonal one, whatever. The same principles will apply in terms of where you should put your units and how you should put them on the table. So with this one, one army would be deployed down this side, the other one down the other side, 10 inches in from the edge. So, deployment. Let's talk about deployment. Obviously, you roll off to decide who's going to defend or attack. If you win the roll off, you can decide what you're going to do. If you decide to defend, it means you deploy first and then you alternate, but you get to choose which side you're on. If you choose to be the attacker, you deploy second. So the first thing I would say about making that decision is most terrain on tables should be symmetrical. So in terms of picking your deployment zone, that doesn't really matter. What matters is, do you want to deploy first or do you want to deploy second? Now, there's an easy answer to that. If you have infiltrating units in your army and your opponent also has infiltrating units in their army, you want to deploy first. Simple as that. That's what you want to do. Because otherwise you're going to play cat and mouse across the middle of the board in no man's land, and they're going to get the first drop in the middle of the board if they choose to. So if I've got infiltrators in my list, and I know my opponent has, if I'm thinking tactically, I want to place my infiltrators first because I can put them in the middle of the board in no man's land, 9 inches away from their deployment zone, and then when they get to put their infiltrators down, they have to then also be 9 inches away from my models. So I can string out a unit of infiltrators across the middle of the board, for example, and then where they've got to then put their infiltrators is either going to be over there or over there. So straight away I've got a bit of board control just by chucking a unit down first. So if you've got infiltrators, and so is your opponent, you probably want to try and deploy first. If you haven't got any infiltrators, you probably want to deploy second, so you can do a bit of counter deploying. In terms of where the units go. If you've got infiltrators and your opponent hasn't, then again you probably want to go second, but you also, if you have infiltrators and they don't, you want to save your infiltrating units until last, because you will have free reign over the middle of the board as to where they go, and you'll be able to see their entire army, or at least a big chunk of it, depending on how many units they've got, and that can influence your decision as to where your infiltrators go. So let's talk a little bit about infiltrators. If a unit has the infiltrating ability, it means it can deploy anywhere in no man's land as long as it's 9 inches away from your enemy deployment zone and 9 inches away from your enemy models. So it's a very powerful ability. Other powerful abilities which should influence your deployment are things such as scout moves, and also lone operative, very powerful abilities. Scout moves means that as soon as you have the roll off to decide who goes first, so after deployment's done, you roll to see who's going to go first. As soon as that roll off's done, scout moves. And that's before you look at secondaries, get your CP, do your command phase. It's before the command phase. It's straight after the roll off. So having units with scout moves is very powerful, because essentially you get free movement, and depending on whether you're going first or second could influence where you move that scouting unit. If you go in first, you might want to run it forwards to maybe get a cheeky first turn charge. If it's out in the open and you go second, you might think, oh, I'll run it behind there to hide. So it's very powerful ability. Lone Operative is also very powerful. Lone Operatives mean essentially unless the enemy is within 12 inches, they cannot shoot the unit that has the Lone Operative ability. So again, putting a Lone Operative unit out in the open, not really a bad idea because it can't be shot at anyway unless the enemy is quick enough to get within 12 inches of it. So yeah, so 3 very powerful things to think about, if your army list contains any of those units. So let's go into deployment. So how to get a good first turn deployment. There are a few key factors. One, I've mentioned infiltrators. If you've got infiltrators and so is your opponent, you want to infiltrate first. If you've got infiltrators and your opponent hasn't, you want to infiltrate second. Rule of thumb, always deploy second unless you've both got infiltrators, in which case go first. Another key thing, think about scouting units if you have any, and where you would want them to move after that roll-off, whether it be run into a defensive position or an attacking position. So don't necessarily think about where you're deploying them, think about where they'll be after the scout move. And third and final point is actually, which I haven't touched on yet, is secondary objectives. If you deploy correctly, pretty much most of these secondary objectives should be achievable turn 1. You should never really be in a position where you have your turn 1, you go first or second, it doesn't really matter, and you get your secondaries and go, I can't do either of those. Unless you're really unlucky, you should be able to score secondary points in your first turn pretty much all the time. Maybe not both of them, but at least some points turn 1, and your deployment can certainly help with that. And fourth, and finally, there's 4 things. Use terrain. If you've got a big rock like Dwayne Johnson here, hide behind it. The amount of times I see games or play against people and they've got, I've got this big unit, and they stick it out in the open, and I'm just there with, I don't know, for example, my guard army or my chaos army. I just look at that and think, if I go turn 1, that's just dead. You've just wasted a unit. Hide things. And following on from 4, there's actually 5 things. Use strategic reserves. Strategic reserves are free now. You can put up to, in a 2,000 point game, you can put up to 500 points of units in reserves. And so, not all tables are as dense in terms of terrain like this. It may not seem massively dense, but if you actually look between the deployment zones, there's actually lots of places to hide. But if in doubt, if you're not sure, if you've got lots of big units, lots of models, put things in reserve, put things in deep strike. If things aren't on the board, they cannot be killed. So simple, and yet so many people don't use reserves or deep strike. Why? Why do you want to start your entire army on the board? You've got more to try and hide. Stuff's going to get shot. So they're the things you need to think about, really. So let's start with some basics. Home objective. Simple question. Do you need to start with a unit on your home objective? No. No, you don't. You need to start something on the board near your home objective so you can move on to it. You do not score primaries in the first turn. You're not scoring any objectives for having this, any points for having this objective at the start of your turn if you go first or second. It doesn't matter. So don't go, I'll put my termagants here, as an example, or your intercessors or whatever you've got. Put them behind the rock. And then in your turn 1, just go, there you go, I've got the objective. Don't just throw things on objective thinking, I need to hold my home objective. You don't need to be on it at the start of your turn 1. You just don't. So you don't need to do that. In terms of home objectives, always trying to put units on your home objective that A, aren't expensive, B, are not going to be wasted if they're sitting on your home objective out of line of sight all game. So just termagants. They don't kill much, they can sit on an objective. No problem. Cheap unit can sit there. If they're out of line of sight, unless your opponent's got indirect fire, they're going to be fairly safe. Yeah? Don't go and put, I don't know, unit of Terminators on your home objective. Okay, yes, they'll be very difficult to remove, but it's also probably a 200 point-ish unit that's just sitting there, not really contributing. So that's what you should do for your home objective. For terrain, as I mentioned, make sure you use it. Hide behind the big rock, hide some things behind the crate. Use the craters to get benefits of cover for infantry. Put things here, you can hide behind this. There's also, very, very small firing angles to get here. Hide as much as you can. And use strategic reserves to hide other units. Talking about strategic reserves, what sort of units should I put in strategic reserves, Heretic Dave? I'm going to tell you. Predominantly, you want shooty units with short ranges that are fragile. So, Zoanthropes, perfect example. They're quite shooty, and they've got a 24-inch range. If I start with a unit of Zoanthropes on the board, right? If they're out there, they're going to get shot, okay? And they've only got a 24-inch range. So if I start them over here and hide them, and then I move out to there, they're not really going to be in range of very much. They're not very useful. If I start them in reserves, my turn 2 or turn 3, they can just come on within 24 inches of their target and shoot it. Another good unit to use for reserves is, for example, Eradicators. If you're a Space Marine player, they've got an 18-inch gun. There is no point starting Eradicators on the board. It is a complete waste of time. Put them in reserves. It will keep them safe. They can come on where you need them. They'll be in range and they can shoot something. So, shooter units in reserves. Deep strike. Yeah, coming on from reserves or deep strike, shooting is always best, because if you're a combat unit and you're going to come in from reserves or deep strike, you're going to be 9 inches away. A 9-inch charge is by far from reliable. But there is the stratagem Rapid Ingress, which if you have got something big and scary that's going to deep strike, if you're able to bring it in for a CP at the end of your opponent's movement phase and deploy it somewhere it's not going to get shot off in their turn, do that, because then you can move it and then charge. So you're going to get a lot less than a 9-inch charge. But shooty units are just better from reserves and deep strike, because you're always going to get the benefit of them. You don't want to spend 200 points on a unit, deep strike it, and then fail your 9-inch charge and just go, what a complete waste. So that's something to bear in mind for reserves and deep strike. Another good units to put in reserves and deep strike are just small units that can fit in small spaces, especially units that have abilities where they can deep strike within those 9 inches, such as Space Marine Inceptors or Trigons, which can deep strike within 3 inches. They can't charge that turn, but they can pop it within 3 inches. So they're a lot more flexible in terms of where they can deploy. So that's quite useful. And yeah, as mentioned, small units to deep strike, which are really good. Okay, not every army's got the option, but things like Ripper Swarms, Nurglings, a small unit of 5-man assault marines, I don't know, things like that. Things that haven't got a massive footprint that you can just drop in, not necessarily to kill things, but to score points. If you get engaged on all fronts, if you investigate signals behind enemy lines, things like that. Small little cheap units you can just drop in to get points. So that's that. But anyway, back to deployment. So yes, I've talked about hiding things as much as possible, putting things in reserves, putting things in deep strike. Essentially, you want most of, if not all of your army, not being able to get shot at if you don't go first. If you go first, then you're going to have to move things out. You're going to get shot at. But if you lose that first turn roll off, you don't want to lose some big assets before you've even moved. So you want to hide as much as possible, either on the board or off the board. So that's that as a sort of rule of thumb. I mentioned secondary objectives. Now, if we just look at all the secondary objectives here, all of them are achievable first turn, apart from Defend Stronghold and Stormmaster objectives. So you can forget about worrying about deploying to help you get those objectives. Not important. Okay? Some of these are around killing things, like Assassinate, no prisoners, overwhelming force. Okay. Again, and bring it down. Right, killie objectives, you can't deploy to score killie objectives. So you can forget about thinking about them when you're deploying. Alright? All these other ones you can think about when you're deploying. Apart from, arguably, capture enemy outposts, that's not going to happen your turn 1 if you go first or second. If you're able to get your opponent's home objective turn 1, you deserve a gold medal as far as I'm concerned, because I think it's impossible. But all the other ones are achievable. There's one which is not so achievable, and that's behind enemy lines. There are only a few factions that I'm aware of that are able to get to your opponent's deployment zone turn 1, because you're not going to do it with aircraft, so you need to be very, very quick, like, I don't know, Eldari, or have lots of infiltrating and or scout moving units, or some real big shenanigans. Like Tyranid Vanguard, where you can deep strike one turn as if it's one turn later, or things like Death Watch, where you can pick up at the end of your opponent's turn and then drop back in. So if you go second, you can pick up something at the end of their turn 1 and then drop back in on your turn 1. But most of the time, behind enemy lines isn't really achievable either. But you can think about it. If you're a quick enough army, you can think about it. But here we have 8 objectives that are all achievable turn 1. Which is, let's have a quick count up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Half of the objectives you can get turn 1 if you just deploy properly. So, that's half of the objectives. Okay, you pick up 2 cards every turn. So, as I mentioned earlier, you should be able to get at least 1 objective, unless you're really unlucky, in your turn 1. Whether you go first or second. Some are easier if you go first, but they're still achievable if you go second, depending on what your opponent's done and things like that. But obviously you can't necessarily deploy thinking about what your opponent's going to do in their turn 1, because you don't know. But let's have a look at these. Right. Extend battle lines. Have your home objective and 1 in no man's land. I mean, that's just easy, right? Because as mentioned, termagants, they can run onto your home objective, and then whether you go first or second, you should better at least capture 1 no man's land objective, right? If you go first or second. There are ways to help that and guarantee that. We'll get to that in a moment. Other ones that include getting no man's land objectives are tempting target and secure no man's land. And also cleanse, 2 actions on no man's land objective. So there are 4 objectives out of the 8 achievable ones, turn 1 essentially. So half of the achievable first turn objectives are about getting units forward into no man's land. So how can your deployment help that? I'll tell you. Okay, so yeah, how can you achieve these objectives easily turn 1 if you go first or second? They're a lot more easier if you go first, but they're still achievable if you go second. How do you get to no man's land quickly? Well, as mentioned, if you have infiltrating units, which I'd highly recommend get at least 1 in your army list. There'll be a video about army lists soon. Put them somewhere where they're either on a no man's land objective or near a no man's land objective, so you can very easily get onto no man's land objectives. Another way of easily getting onto no man's land objectives is using scout units. So what I've done here, I've just thrown 3 different types of units down. I've got infiltrating units over here. Yeah, they can hide behind this line of sight blocking terrain when I deploy. If I go first, great, I'm there. If I go second, the enemy's going to find it difficult to get there and deal with them. Yeah? And they've also got fight first, which is quite nice. But, looking at where their deployment and terrain is, unless they've put something in that small corner that's going to run around here, they should be fairly safe. If they put something over there, there's a line of sight blocking rock in the way. They should be fairly safe, even if I go second to get to that no man's land objective. Same with my Lictor Victor over here. He's also lone operative, so I've put him there. Yeah, they can move. They can maybe even get line of sight. I could put him here. Chances are, unless they're really quick, they're not going to be able to shoot him. And then in my turn, whether I go first or second, he can no man's land objective. Yeah, easy. Alright, so infiltrating units are very good for these objectives early game. Scouting units are also very good. So, as I mentioned, they get pre-game moves. So let's say if I go first, change to this, pre-game move, they're on that central objective. Yeah, easy. Or if I don't go first, pre-game move, behind the ruin, they're safe. Then in my turn, central objective. Easy peasy. Yeah, scout moves. Right, another way to get mobility turn 1 to score these types of objectives is just have fast units. So what do I mean by fast units? Things that move more than 6 inches. Something that Death Guard struggle with, but don't tell Death Guard Andy. So let's think Space Marines. You've got jump pack units. You've got assault intercessors with jump packs. You've got Vanguard veterans, Sanguinary Guard if you're Blood Angels, those sorts of things, or Outriders. They're very quick, albeit they're not as mobile because they can't go through walls and they can't fly. So jump pack units are very, very good because, you know, I could start some guys here, jump them out over there, done. Same if they're here, jump them out over there, done. Yeah, mobility is very useful. Another thing that also makes units a lot more mobile, and in more ways than one, are transports. So obviously a transport itself is normally fairly quick, you know, 10, 12, 15 inches, depending on what faction and what transport it is. They're quite quick. You know, you could zip out onto an objective. Fantastic, great, you got it. But what also makes them very good for mobility is that units can disembark 3 inches and then move. So if you've got a unit of Space Marine intercessors in, I don't know, an impulsor, or whatever it is, that means essentially, if you need to get that unit out of that transport, those intercessors suddenly have a 9-inch move and not a 6-inch move. 3 inch for disembark, 6-inch move. So you could put, I don't know, a rhino here, for example, with some guys in it, hidden out of line of sight behind Dwayne Johnson here. Disembark the troops, move 6 inches, you're on the middle objective. Yeah, you can get mobility lots of different ways. So that's a bit about how you can, you know, easily score these kind of objectives turn 1 where you need to get to no man's land objectives, you know, do actions. Another thing about actions, or they're called actions in 9th edition, they're not actions so much anymore, they're just things you can do. Units that are really good for doing actions are units with assault weapons, because if your unit is eligible to shoot, it can do an action. If you've got an assault weapon, you can advance and shoot. So termagants, I believe flesh borers are still assault weapons. You know, they can advance onto that central objective and still do me an action like cleanse, or, you know, whatever it may be. Or, you know, so that's something to think about. Okay, so lots of ways of getting to middle objectives quickly. Infiltrators if you've got infiltrators, scout moves if you've got scout moves, dedicated transports if you've got dedicated transports, jumpy units, you know, and assault weapon units. So, you know, when you're deploying, obviously here I've got lots of infiltrators and scout units, so it's quite easy to show how you can score these objectives turn 1. But if you haven't got any infiltrators or any scout units, you've probably got something in your army that's quick, right? So if you've got, I don't know, some jump pack intercessors or whatever, deploy them here. They're hidden behind the crate, jump out on there turn 1, or behind here, over there turn 1. Yeah, or like I said, put a rhino here or an impulsor, jump out on there turn 1. And all you're doing, okay, yeah, you're getting points, which is great, points mean prizes. But okay, if you've thrown some assault intercessors into no man's land just to get some points, that's fine. Points win games. And to be honest, if the enemy wants to then run around that rock to kill some assault intercessors, they're then going to be exposed to a big chunk of your army. And all you've done is trade a cheap unit of assault intercessors with jump packs. So that's absolutely fine. You're almost baiting your opponent to go, yeah, I've put a unit in there to get some points. Come and kill them, please. And then I'll kill whatever kills them. So trading is fine. But yeah, think about what types of units can go where to help you get onto no man's land objectives, and obviously actions cleanse. Another 2 objectives which are really easy to get turn 1, and you can also deploy for. Eridan Island deploy teleport hammer. Essentially, I mean, you need something to get to the middle of the board. So again, scout move units, infiltrate units, transports, assault weapon units. Just run into the middle, do an action, or run into the middle, and if there's stuff there, kill it. So again, very easy to get if you've got turn 1. If you've got turn 2, Eridan Island can be a bit more tricky because normally the opponent's moved something towards the middle. But again, if it's in the middle, you're probably able to shoot it. So you can chuck a unit in there and then kill what's on there, and then you can still get it. So same sort of idea for those sort of objectives. investigate signals and engage on all fronts, you need to be a bit more savvy with in terms of how you can score those early game. So yeah, investigate signals and engage on all fronts. Essentially, again, you can easily set up for on deployment. Investigate signals, do actions in the corners of the battlefield. Just when you're deploying, make sure you got a unit that's either within 9 inches of the corner, wholly within 9 inches of the corner, or a unit that can easily move to wholly within 9 inches of the corner of the battlefield in your turn. So for example, here, I've chucked some termagants behind the crate, because, you know, they'll be safe behind the crate. They're small, they can hide behind it. They can just run over there, investigate a signal. They've also got assault weapons, so if I put them here instead, they could advance and do that, that's fine. And over on this side, I've put some gene stealers. And I think, oh, but they're in the open. Yeah, they got scout move, it's alright. If I need to, you know, before the battle begins, I can run over there if I don't go turn 1. You know, and you know, even if I do, I could do that anyway. And then if I get investigate signals, they can just run back and do it. Not a problem. Not a problem. Or if you've got intercessors, you know, they're good little units to have sort of near the corners, or Ripper Swarms. I mean, if you're deep striking Ripper Swarms on a turn, you've got investigate signals, you can have a field day. Pop a Ripper Swarm in each corner, pretty much. So yeah, so that you can definitely set up for turn 1 as well. Just keep units in the deployment zone near the corners of the battlefield. Obviously, not every deployment allows you to do investigate signals early game. So if we got the one where you're in the quarter here, you're only really going to be able to do 1. But again, then if you've got something quick here, you can get across. Yeah, so always think about investigate signals in your deployment, or about getting to no man's land objectives or to the centre. Always make sure you've got some mobile units in your army, or some infiltrators, or some scout moves, or something. Speed is key, mobility wins games. Another one which you can think about while deploying is engage on all fronts if you draw that first turn. Some deployments it's a bit more tricky than others. So for example, the Dawn of War deployment isn't an easy one to get engaged on all fronts turn 1 unless you have infiltrators. If you haven't got infiltrators, you're going to find it tricky, because you're in 2 quarters. But unless you've got something really fast on one flank, or a scout move, or an infiltrator unit, you're not going to get it. But most other deployments, like the one that's in the table quarter, or the one that's diagonal, it's actually very easy to get 3 quarters turn 1 if you just think about it in your deployment. So deploy thinking about getting into quarters, deploy thinking about getting into corners, deploy thinking about getting into the middle, and deploy thinking about getting into towards no man's land objectives. And you can probably position some units to be able to get all these objectives with probably literally 3 or 4 units of your army. With 3 or 4 units in your army, you can probably achieve any of those objectives turn 1 if you go first. Turn 2, like I said, it's a bit more tricky depending on what your opponent can do, but you can't do anything about it. Yeah, but you need to think about this. This scores points, this wins games. And not only that, if you're getting onto no man's land objectives, that's going to help you with primary as well. Either, you know, if they survive, you score primary, or if they don't, you might deny your opponent's primary. You know, if they went first and then you go and take them off them and so on. So think about deploying to how to score secondaries in your turn 1. Specifically these 8, you can't do anything about the other ones. Think about how you can get to the middle of the board or no man's land, deny some objectives. Think about infiltrators, when you put them down, where you put them down. Same lone operatives, same with scout units. If you've got dedicated transports, if you've got fast units, think about where you want them for deployment in terms of the secondaries. And think about where you put your army in terms of the terrain. Hide as much as you can. Very rarely do I start a game where I'm thinking, oh, I really need turn 1, because if I don't, I'll lose half my army. If I'm thinking that before we go to roll off, I know I've deployed wrong. You use the terrain. Hide things behind here. Put things in the crater behind there and behind there. There's only small firing lines. Put things behind the crate. Put things in the crater. Put things in reserves. Put things in deep strike. You can put half of your army off the board if you make the right list, with lots of deep striking units, lots of reserve units. And we'll definitely get to a list building video soon, giving tips on how to build lists. It would be basically giving tips on how to score points with a list. Yeah? How do you basically play an entire game where nearly every turn you pick up your secondaries and you're like, yes, I can do both of these, or I can do one easily. If your list can't score 100 points playing against no opponent army, your list isn't good enough. It's got a problem. It's too slow, or it doesn't have enough infiltrating or scout abilities, or not enough mobility. You need mobility to win games. And it starts with deployment. Deployment is absolutely key. You know, if I've got a huge army and it's going to fill my entire deployment zone, or if there's too many firing lines, I can't put things here because it's going to get shot from something over there, or I can't put something here because it's going to get shot by something over there. I can only hide behind here and there. Think about what can hide behind there. Think about what you need to actually start on the board. So, you know, the units that can score you the points turn one, and then as much as you can, put in reserves, put in deep strike. You can put 500 points in reserves. That's a lot of units. You know, you can put up to 1,000 points in deep strike if you really want to. You know, with this Tyrannus list here, this is only bits of it, but for this game I put nearly half my army off the board. And it just meant that I was able to hide, I was able to play KG, I was able to play the mission and score points. Did I kill a massive amount? No, but 40k, unfortunately, isn't really about killing things much. And, you know, if you've seen my videos before, you'd see my Death Watch army. Half my Death Watch start off the board in Deep Strike most of the time. You know, you don't need to start everything on the board. You know, not everyone, lots of people I play or see play, you know, either in person or on YouTube, lots of people are very lazy when it comes to their deployment, and it costs them. You ask them, what, you know, are you going to start anything in transports, off in reserves and deep strike? And everyone's just like, oh, I'm going to start everything on the board. And I'm just like, okay. You know, so not only does that hamper that army's ability to score points, and it hampers their ability for them to hide things, it also means as an army that's facing an army that you know there's nothing off the board, you don't have to worry about screening out your deployment zone. You can just go forwards. It's one, you know, if you've got lots of things off the board that can pop up here, there, and everywhere, you're also making your opponent think, oh, hang on, he could put something in there and get some points, depending on what secondaries you get. I better screen out that part of my deployment zone, or, you know, things like that. So you can really mess with people's game plan if you've got a lot ready to come on the board. If everything's on the board, you're seeing the enemy, you can face it, you can counter it. So please, I beg of you, put things behind terrain, put things off the board, think about how you deploy it in terms of objectives, and feel free to leave your comments below on your thoughts. And most of all, hit subscribe, hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. There's videos every week, and thanks for watching.